Hello and welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. It's our goal here to help create better, more knowledgeable HVAC and building performance technicians and contractors. By helping the two professions better understand each other, this podcast aims to make customers happy in the homes they live in and the buildings they work in through the work that our listeners do. You can also leave us a voicemail by going to our podcast page, buildinghvacscience.com, clicking on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner. You can just drop us a message. We'll get the email in case you have anything on your mind or want to share a topic or give us some feedback. We also encourage comments and feedback no matter what platform you're on, and we hope you're enjoying our content. Some of the topics we discuss require technical training for proper interpretation or safe execution, so if you're trained pro, you can immediately proceed, but if you're not, please consult with and hire a trained pro. In this episode, Eric welcomes David Richardson from NCI, the National Comfort Institute. David shares his backstory, and then they delve into the evolution of HVAC standards, focusing on important measurements, diagnostics, and craftsmanship in delivering comfort, safety, and energy efficiency. NCI has a tremendous legacy in affecting those changes in standards, in measurements, diagnostics, and craftsmanship. It's going to be a really interesting episode. I hope you listen into every detail. David also introduces the concept of high-performance HVAC, emphasizing the importance of field measurements to diagnose and solve system inefficiencies. And of course, we highlight tools. Everybody likes tools, or we like tools here at TrueTech Tools. We talk about the TrueFlow Grid from the Energy Conservatory, which has really revolutionized testing accuracy and streamlined processes. And Eric and David wrap up by encouraging professionals to embrace small and consistent improvements, just like anything in life. Measure system performance, and do that on your own projects. Really learn and absorb from that. And engage with the growing community of like-minded industry peers who are eager to share knowledge. And that's what we're trying to do here, is really help build this community of like-minded industry peers. Let's get on with the episode and listen in as David and Elk talk about unlocking high-performance HVAC insights with David Richardson.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. Eric Kaiser here. Bill Spohn, missing in action again today. Don't know where he's at. He's who knows where. But we are here, and with me today, Mr. David Richardson from the National Comfort Institute. I've been wanting to get David on here for a long time. He's a great instructor, a great friend, great mentor, just all-around great guy. And if you don't know David, I'm not going to go too deep into what all he does. Maybe he wants to tell us a little bit more about himself. So welcome, David.
Well, thanks, Eric. I'm humbled. Now you've set the bar awful high. I hope I made it.
You've lived up to that and way more.
Well, I appreciate that. It's humbling coming from you. Thank you.
Totally deserved. Totally deserved.
The thoughts are definitely go the same way. You've been a friend for a long time. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I'm thankful we can finally make it happen. I think this is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from and how did you get to where you're at now?
I was a boss's kid. So I've said this before. It's interesting when you're a kid and if you've got a dad that pushes you to try to excel and live up to what they believe that you can live up to. They don't want you sitting around too much when you're a kid. So he gave me the opportunity, I'll say, when I was 12 years old. He said, you can either deliver papers, mow lawns, or you can come work with me. And I thought, oh, cool, working with Dad, that'll be easy. I got the official title of gopher. I got to go grab the tools for the guys, and I was getting in places that scared most kids my age. So we learned about crawl spaces and attics and basements and all those fun things. And the more I got involved in the technical side of it, the hands-on side, I really started enjoying it. I never thought that I would, but I was like, this is cool, seeing how all these things work together and seeing how my dad tried to do things the right way. I think that for a lot of us in the industry, our fathers instill a lot of the values that we have. And he instilled a lot of those values to do the right thing and try to do your best and don't make any excuses. So started doing that, got into, of course, started with install, then started learning more about the service side of it. And he said, if you're going to do this stuff, you need to know how it starts all the way up to how it's finished. So I didn't just start in a cushy design job or anything like that. I mean, I was out in the trenches crawling through mud and everything. And we ended up going to school for it after I graduated high school. And here we are. So it's weird that when we first started doing this stuff, of course, we're talking about high performance HVAC. I always thought that we did really good work. I However, I had no metric to really gauge that with that looked nice, but we didn't have any measurements. So we didn't know. And once mid-90s, I guess it was, is when I was first introduced to writings by Rob Falk in contracting business magazines. And I started questioning. I was like, hey, I think we're doing some things that we can improve. And of course, Dad gave me the typical 30 years we've been doing this and haven't had any problems type of response that we often hear. And I kept pushing and finally got to meet Rob when I was actually had one foot out the door. I was planning on getting out of HVAC back around 2000 because my first son was born. And I told my wife, I was like, this is a dead end road. Everybody's selling out everybody for $100. And I was like, there's no future in this. I love the work, but I hated all the problems that went along with it. So that was when I actually met Rob face to face. And for anyone on this that's listening that has ever met Rob Falk, he has or had a unique way of connecting with a higher purpose in everybody. And I finally saw the missing pieces. And there really was a purpose in what we did. And now there was a way to prove it. And Rob was the one that showed me that. And I'll forever be grateful to him for introducing me to what we coin high performance HVAC. So, of course, I came to work for NCI full time back in 2010. They got me hooked on the teaching. And for anyone who has ever made the transition from the field to standing in front of a group of people, you know how uncomfortable it is. Because I wasn't a trained speaker, a trained writer, or anything like that. I was just trying to share stuff. And there were a lot of lessons there. Rob was very grateful, shared things with me, mentored me to help me get that out there, to share it. And I tell Dominic now, I was like, I can't believe you guys pay us to do this stuff, to share and help others. It's cool. I'm very blessed to be where I'm at. Things lined up, and I'm grateful I was smart enough to see the writing on the wall and start going down this route back in 2010. It's hard to believe I have been at NCI for 15 years.
That's quite a good run for you there. And you guys are growing, put on some new trainers recently, brought in some new faces as well, and expanding a little bit, right?
We've added some great folks in the past few years. Just they align with what our mission is. They're good folks. They're good people. One, of course, a good mutual friend of ours, Adam Muffich, has just been incredible. Seeing his growth and taking his practical experience and then turn it into curriculum that he's leading right now. It's too premature to talk about what he's working on, but when it comes out, people will notice a difference because with every NCI class, it's not just a string of facts. Adam's put his heart and soul into what he's working on, and it shows. He's just been incredible. It's been so fun watching his growth and seeing his acceleration and how he's able to share, and even just in his presentation skills. In just a short year's time, I think the first presentation he had done was at AHR last year with me, and everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And he overcame that, and I was like, he's going to be gold. If he overcame that, most professionals would shut down. And he didn't. He just kept going. And to see the level of progress, it's just been incredible. We had a Rob Minnick last year also. He's such a wealth of experience. He literally has the badge that says, been there, done that. And to have his experience, not only on the technical side, but also the business side, is such a relief to be able to have that and share that with people, the knowledge and the experience that he has. And then a little before that, we also added on Mark Hunt, who had previously been with Viessmann and Peerless Boilers, doing the combustion side. He's like Jim Davis's clone, just his hair's not quite as cool. But it's neat that he has such a gift for instilling in people the purpose of why you test, why combustion testing is so important. And guys are ready to walk through a wall when they come out of Mark's classes. Those are the three that instructor-wise. But it's been a good time at NCI. We're very fortunate.
That's fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that because Jim's getting up there in years and not teaching quite as much as he used to anymore. But he did some fantastic combustion classes.
Yeah, he's the daddy of it. It's neat to be able to see and hear the stories. We have an internal document that we may release it someday. I don't know. But we have an internal document of a lot of gyms where a lot of this stuff came from. And it's never been published. It's outside of NCI, but we call it the hair-raising adventures of Captain CO. Yes, pun intended. And to see like where Jim discovered rising CO and falling oxygen, how it was a total accident. And to see the places where he was, the equipment that he was working on, and how just by asking why and what if, he started to put these things together when they weren't even in the books. Today, we take it for granted, test multiple readings. You test throughout the entire combustion cycle. When Jim was first learning this stuff back in the mid to late 70s, it was take a one-time reading. And he asked a very simple question, why? Why do you do that? And he kept asking why. He was curious. And the rest of the industry benefited. from it. It's neat to see it come full circle where so many people thought Jim was crazy and this guy running around out in the woods that was nuts. I shouldn't say woods. Close enough as Kentucky. It wasn't too far from me. But to see it come full circle to where now it's being recognized that this guy wasn't crazy. He was onto something. And now we have the things, the test instruments and the knowledge to back it up. So it's cool to see that for him, to see that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool for the industry to see it happen too. I did a live stream with Tyler Nelson back in December and was doing some research and a little bit of looking for that and ran across some information about when combustion testing first started. And that was actually back in the 1800s. And I was just blown away that we've had combustion testing. It was right at about 150 years. And to see that we've had it around that long and that it's finally coming a lot more mainstream. And we've got the instruments now, not only to do single point tests, but also record over that whole combustion cycle of startup and running and shutdown and prove that the whole thing is running as it's really supposed to. And that to me is really cool to have watched come into that stage.
It is. Technology has made it so much easier. We're talking about high performance HVAC. It's when we were in the field, we would have given our right arms to have had some of the stuff that's out today.
Oh, you're not kidding.
Because we were like, all these problems that we used to run into testing in the field, it's like their solutions are there. So the barrier for entry into this is easier now than it ever has been. There's so much good information out there, test instruments that support you and how to do it. It's just, there's no better time to get involved.
100%. Let's dig in here. I really wanted to talk with you about high performance HVAC, and that's where we started at on this. And I'd like to stick a definition to high performance HVAC because it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. But what is the high performance HVAC and how do we get from maybe not high performing HVAC to high performing HVAC? What's that process look like?
Okay, that's a big one. Actually, I'm going to be presenting on that pretty good chunk of that at the symposium this year too. And we're calling it the path to high performance HVAC. So it'll be fun. Brian's been gracious enough to ask us back. So there'll be a lot of stuff in there about this, but as a high level view, I guess to look at high performance HVAC, probably the easiest way to break it down would be what it is first. And when you look at someone who has committed to being a high performance HVAC professional, what they're looking to do is deliver comfort, safety, health, and then the result of that is energy efficiency. And they do that using proven test methods and documented results and design principles that work. And I say professionals because what we're doing is we're trying to get back to craftsmanship that this industry used to see, but it kind of went out the window. Now, high performance HVAC also relies on field measurements and proven design principles to diagnose systems, to figure out where the problems are and then identify solutions. It's transparent. That's what's so cool about it. You're not making any assumptions. There's no smoke and mirrors. It's transparent. You're taking field measurements and figuring out what's going on. And oftentimes you're solving problems that people have said you can't solve, or they're too busy trying to throw equipment at it. And what's cool is the craftsmanship side of this, you get paid for your knowledge. You get paid to resolve the problems. And then when you have resolved those problems, you repeat the original measurements that you took to prove that the systems work as designed. I mean, it's just real differentiation on how you're doing that. And you choose how much you're measuring. You can go crazy with the measurements, or you can start small and start at the equipment, or you can branch out into the HVAC system. And you can even get into what's contained in the HVAC system. All of those are aspects of high performance HVAC, but it's about measuring, testing, diagnosing, adjusting, and doing the repairs. There's a process that we teach in all the NCI classes to test, diagnose, repair, remeasure. That way you're proving it. So, of course, design always ties in with this, but design without testing is just a guess. So we have to tie that in. How's that for a definition of what it is?
That's a pretty solid definition right there, I think. It sounds to me like what you're really going for there is delivering what you promised to the customer.
That's what it ultimately boils down to. And when you do that, because to have high performance, there, on the flip side, unfortunately, has to be low performance. And what the typical industry installation is doing is giving low performance. And of course, NCI has been doing studies on this from both formal and informal measurements from contractors, just from the software that we've had called Comfort Max. And it continues to repeat since 2005. We were actually part of the original study that was done on it, some of the systems here in central Kentucky. And what happens is because of the assumptions that we make and using daddy's duck design rules and insulation and assuming all these things, the typical system runs at a 57% delivered capacity. And what that means is that the HVAC equipment is only delivering 57% of what it's rated to do in a laboratory into the conditioned space for the customer. So there's losses. There's all kinds of things that are going on that are causing that number to be low. It could be duct leakage, low airflow, thermal losses, improper charge, anything that goes into the performance of that system. High performance is about maximizing all those principles and those aspects of a system and fine-tuning them so that you're within plus or minus 10% of whatever the equipment's rated into the building enclosure. And we're measuring and we're proving that. So instead of assuming that a piece of equipment is a certain SEER 2 rating because it has a label slapped on the front of it, we're measuring and we're verifying it. And Rob and Dominic were the ones that years ago, back in the 90s, they saw there was a big problem with HVAC systems. We were selling based off of yellow tags instead of the principles that had made HVAC great. So what happened was they were like, this is a really big opportunity here for forward-thinking contractors who want to do the right thing, who've got integrity. They're trying to do what's right to prove it, to differentiate their businesses. And that's really, in essence, where NCI was born.
That's a pretty big piece right there. And it was a good observation on their part, I think, seeing that in the industry and being able to do something about it. What other pieces do you see? So you're measuring in. Obviously, there's a lot of pieces between measuring in and measuring out that have to go into that to make that improvement.
Yeah. And that's where the biggest disconnect is a lot of times with high performance is guys will do a fantastic job of doing the original testing and the diagnostics. But then when it comes to turning that into a scope of work that can actually be tested and then confidently tested and saying, you know what, this is going to work. That's where oftentimes it falls off. And that's why I believe that test out doesn't happen as often as it should, is because guys just, they're not as confident as they could be. And the one way I'll always remember that Rob's shared with this was you're experimenting. He said, so you always make sure that you allow enough labor on a job because he said things will go wrong. And the only reason that you're doing this is you're serving your customers well. He's like, the problems would still be there. You just wouldn't know about them. So once you've got that knowledge, there's really a responsibility to do the right thing instead of sticking your head in the sand and ignoring it. So with doing these tests, figuring out that scope of work, it's made easier now than it ever has been. The guys from the Energy Conservatory just did a webinar earlier today on forecasting, and they've taken a testing principle around fan law 2 and they've automated it. I mean, I'm like, that is so cool that they're automating these tools and these tricks that we've taught for years to make it easier. So now you can have confidence that, hey, if I upsize this return to this size, that's what's needed, or I downsize the equipment to X size, the existing ducts are going to work. So a lot of it is fear of the unknown. It's one of the biggest barriers to doing this, and it gets in the way.
Now, of course, this is going to be coming out a little bit later on, but I saw that webinar today with the Energy Conservatory happen. Fortunately, I had other meetings to be in, so I'll have to go back and watch it later. And that's, of course, with the TrueFlow Grid. And that TrueFlow Grid, to me, has changed the residential HVAC airflow measuring capabilities, I'm going to say drastically.
Yeah, because it's taken one of the hardest skills that we've taught for years, and that's determining what fan airflow is. It's the absolute worst possible place to try to get any type of an accurate measurement, and they've taken the guesswork out of it.
They automated a lot of it. They walk you through it and put it into a highly accurate piece of equipment. I can't say it enough. That's one of the tools that, boy, if I'd have had that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, holy smokes of the problems we could have fixed in the field.
We believe in it so much at NCI. It's one of the reasons why it's been baked into a lot of our processes now. That is a change that happened just over the past couple of years because it's proven itself. We like to back up what works, and wow, does that work?
Yeah, that's an amazing piece of equipment. And if you're listening and haven't got a chance to try that out yet, go check out the digital TrueFlow Grid. There's a ton of great information out there. A lot of practitioners that saw that and have really changed their approach to selling and designing systems, I think, as well as save themselves a lot on the back end.
Yeah, it takes a lot of the guesswork out, and usually it automates the process. One of the things that I see a value in it is that it keeps you from inheriting a bad duct system. That's always one of the biggest fears, is to go out install a brand new piece of equipment on a duct system, and they go, oh boy, this wasn't a good one. And part of high performance is making sure you don't get your rear end in a jam. So you test in, you see what's there. And if there's problems, you address them with the homeowner before you ever end up owning them. Because many times they're unaware. They don't know. And unfortunately, in our industry, are still going around matching up model numbers for like and like tonnage and like output capacities. And that's what they're swapping in and out. They're not doing the necessary design procedures and following up and selling that customer what they need instead of trying to sell them something that maybe get them a spiff. They're not looking out for that customer's best interest. And that's one of the things that appealed to me when I first learned about this approach from NCI was it's really a culture and a philosophy of doing HVAC the right way. I mean, it's the way it should be done. And it gets back to the principles of doing things right and caring for your customers and doing what needs to be done. There's something said to that, and then proving it through measurements with different test instruments.
Yeah. And when you say right, you're saying we're not going above and beyond the equipment manufacturer's recommendations here. We're trying to bring it up to their levels of what this stuff is supposed to deliver. And then that's out of the equipment. And then deliver that from the equipment to the space with our ducts. And then deliver it properly into the space with proper outlet and register placement and register selection and all those kinds of things that go into making a space comfortable.
And that's an important distinction that I think high performance really separates, because we use the term HVAC system very generically in our industry, where we'll say we take that into meaning the equipment many times when there is a very clear distinction. There's the HVAC equipment, which is a component of the HVAC system, and there's so much more knowledge that goes into that. Unfortunately, many contractors, they assume that whatever's there is the way it's got to be. And you and I both know, Eric, from a lot of testing, that many times that's not necessarily the right way. Because what drove that initial design was low price on a new construction market. It wasn't designed according by industry standards. There was no JSD&T on that. Instead, it was DADDY. And that's what we went off of, was Daddy's assumptions. And he said, do this. So that's what we did. And we never tested.
Are you picking on your dad over there?
I love my dad. Like I said, he had the right spirit about it, but he wasn't equipped. And that's what's so cool is now we can equip ourselves to do things the right way instead of using a default friction rate on a duct calculator that we know is not going to work.
To that end, I think maybe the lack of testing after we put things in. Essentially, what I saw for years in the field was that the testing we did after we put things in was left up to the homeowner saying, yeah, this is comfortable, or no, it's not.
Yeah, callbacks aren't a very good metric of adjustment.
Well, they're not, because there's a lot of homeowners that won't call you back.
They sure will talk, though.
My first employer told me something. He said, I don't want a happy customer. And I looked at him and he had three heads. He said, I either want an ecstatic customer, somebody that just goes out and brags about me. He said, or I want an unhappy customer that comes back and tells me.
Happy customers don't talk. If they're raving fans, they do.
Yeah. He said, I want those raving fans. He said, those are the ones I really want. He said, but if they can't be that, I'd rather have them be an unhappy customer and come back and tell me about it so that I can go fix it. Because otherwise, I don't know about it.
There's something to that. And I know since the pandemic, there's been a lot of focusing on placebos and silver bullets, slapping things in that magically do things that maybe not quite what we think they are. And if you're measuring and you're testing, you see that the results aren't necessarily what's published. And we see this with all kinds of different products that are out there. I mean, it goes from insulation to magic light bulbs to all kinds of other stuff that they don't necessarily do what they say they're doing. And then there's other products out there that do exactly what they say they're going to do. But without testing, you're just guessing. So you can actually see what's going on, and you can actually shed light on, that wasn't a pun, I promise, shed light on the invisible aspects of our industry through measurement. And there's a saying from W. Edwards Deming, it says, just because you can measure something, it doesn't mean that you should. That's the danger is in high performance HVAC, is thinking perfection versus progress. Is because you start learning all this cool stuff that you can do, and you think you have to go around and measure everything. And if you don't measure it, you start feeling guilty. And that's not necessarily the case. So perfectionism is probably one of the biggest enemies of this, is you have to keep things in context and only take it up to a certain point. And then at that point, your knowledge, there's a hinge point. The customer either is going to do a couple of things. They're going to pay you to do more advanced testing that involves design, seeing what's going on with their equipment, going a little bit farther, or they're going to do some just very generic work, or they're going to do nothing. And that's one of the reasons why we developed the air upgrade process, because it's better than nothing. And a lot of times people would say, well, you're either going to do it perfect or don't do it at all. And that's a lazy approach, when sometimes it's a matter of compromising, but only compromising on the right things and knowing when and where.
It's sometimes not realistic because not everybody wants to do the whole 9 yards. Not everybody can afford to do the whole 9 yards. So I guess really part of high performance HVAC is it's a bit of a science and a bit of an art.
It is. And there's also the side of it that's the customer relation piece. One of the funnest things about it is when we were getting paid to do an air diagnostic, because we invited the customer along. It was engaging. It wasn't just, oh, stay inside, I'm going to go get your model number and serial numbers and see what you got as far as equipment. It was engaging. It was bringing them in. It was putting an air capture hood in their hands and letting them measure, setting an expectation. Well, this is typically what we see out of this size of an outlet. Let's see what you find. You're saying this is the most uncomfortable room in your home. Let's see what we've got. And then making the technical stuff that we have, and some people lose their minds over this, but making the very technical things in our industry very simple and relatable so a homeowner can understand them. Saying you should have 100 boxes of airflow coming out of this outlet, and you've only got 50. So that means you're only filling up the room with half the comfort that you need. Using just relatable concepts, while they might not be 100% technically accurate, people pay for explanations that aren't 100% technically accurate, and they pay well because they solve their problems. And that's what, it made it fun. I'll never forget a gal that was about an hour from here. She had searched and searched and searched for somebody that could test her house. And finally we gave in and we went down, and she was ecstatic that she was actually figuring out, she was solving the problems, not us. We would just ask very pointed questions, and she would say, well, what about this? And what about this? And what if? And she was becoming a detective in her own home. And to see that process and to be fortunate enough to be drug along in it is really cool. That, I think, is something we probably don't focus on enough, is the customer engagement piece. Not selling them, but educating them and helping them understand what's going on in their home. Things that they may have assumed, like 2-story homes always having a massive temperature difference. Well, if it's done right, that's not going to happen. But people have been lied to about that for so long, and they assume that they have to be uncomfortable when there's much deeper issues. And when they start to see why it's happening, it's like, oh, wow. But I'm not going to sell you a bigger box to fix it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like part of this is also going to be, you mentioned being a detective there, is really just listening to what the customer's saying and translating that into what's happening, which means we've got to understand how the system is supposed to be working, and then listening to what that customer says and finding the deficiencies based on what they're telling us.
They know their home better than anyone. And a lot of times they're just looking for someone to listen to them and capture everything that they say, because they will basically tell you what's wrong with their home and they will write the scope of work for you. Your job is to make it easily relatable and understandable. And that's where that, I think, ties in with the measurements. Instead of talking down to someone and you start talking enthalpy and BTUs and all this other stuff, that if we got throat punched every time we mentioned them, we would use much simpler language that, like I said, the boxes of air. It's something that's simple. So many times we get so wrapped up trying to be technically accurate and perfect in these explanations that we forget why we're doing what we're doing. And it's to help a customer solve their problems. And unfortunately, I've been guilty of that. I still remember I wrote an article about it a couple of years ago, Rob Falk beating me up. This was probably 2003, 2002. Because I told him, I said, Rob, this stuff doesn't work. And Rob was kind of a high-pitched voice. He would go, oh, really? Tell me what you're doing. So I puked on him how I would talk to a customer, and he endured it for about 5 minutes. And he said, stop. You suck. I wouldn't buy anything from you either. And I was blown away. But I knew he cared. But that's why he was offering. He wasn't being mean. And he said, not once did you focus on it from a customer's point of view. Not once did you consider their problems. He said, all you did was go out and try to prove how smart you were. He said, you focused on yourself instead of focusing on the customer. And that always stuck with me because it was a pride thing. And he humbled me right there. And I learned a very valuable lesson that it's not about you. It's about that customer, and you got to make it about them. And if we're spouting all this technical knowledge, unless somebody understands it, they're not going to make a decision based on that. And then, of course, because what I was doing is I was whining that everybody was still going with cheapest price. He made a point I never forgot. He said, people go with cheapest price when they don't understand what you're selling. That was a gut punch, because that showed I was a very poor communicator. And I'm still a poor communicator. I do my best. But so many times we have so many biases, the lenses that we look through. And as much as we try to keep in mind that we have those biases, they're always going to be there. We have to be aware of them and try to minimize them when talking with a customer. And one of the most common ones that I think many probably listening would relate with is trying to spend the customer's money. You pull up to somebody's house and you start saying, oh, well, they can only afford this, this, or this, instead of saying they deserve the best and then offering that to them.
If they don't want to afford the best, then be willing to work with them and start picking the lower hanging fruit. What are their biggest desires? And then maybe scaling back that scope of work into what they want to do.
And that scope of work, that's what's so cool about this, is because when you test, you can get down to a surgical precision on what you are going to repair and what you're going to leave alone. The measurements will tell you what to fix and what to leave alone. Where when we started first doing this, I was like, oh, great, we're going to have to tear out everything and redo it. And that wasn't the case. If it's working and it's within acceptable parameters, leave it. There's no reason to touch it. Only fix what's not working, what's causing those whether it's excessive static pressure, low fan airflow, you've got temperature loss or gain in the ducts, fix where the problem's at. But that'll only happen through measurements. You'll never get to that level of detail through visual inspection or even design. You have to have the live measurements. And that's why it's so important, because based off your customer's feedback and then your test measurements, they'll tell you what's going on. And we know most people have these problems, but like you said, Eric, they've gone so familiar with it, they don't know what to do, or they've just been resigned to live with it.
Yeah, I had a conversation on LinkedIn here recently with somebody, and we were talking about houses and how they don't perform. And it makes me wonder, I'm going to step back here a little bit more. One of the things we see in the marketplace with housing and HVAC a lot that I hear comments on is maybe a customer doesn't want to fix something because they say, we're going to move. We're going to move. So I'm not going to fix this because I'm not going to stay here. And it makes me wonder if house comfort doesn't have, or the indoor comfort of that space doesn't have a lot to do with those people wanting to move frequently.
Oh, I absolutely believe it does.
But we have a problem, we have a challenge to overcome, in my opinion, that we don't have people educated to understand what comfort is possible with a house. And there's a lot of comfort problems that can be solved with HVAC, but there's comfort problems too that go outside HVAC. Because if a house is losing heat or gaining heat in a ridiculous amount of volume through a specific area, that's going to create a huge comfort problem. So where does high performance HVAC bridge into looking at things outside of HVAC? Because ultimately it's about the comfort of the occupants.
It is. We use the path to high performance, because PATH has been an acronym. We actually wrote a 6-series article in our magazine. I guess it's probably been a few years ago. But the P stands for pressure. Of course, you're talking about airside pressures like static pressure, pressure drops. The A is airflow, the T is temperature, and the H is heat, or BTUs. So those are like your 4 cornerstones of high performance. And all of those aspects affect not only the HVAC equipment, they also affect the HVAC system. So we're talking the ducts. And then we're talking the building side of the duct system. So there's 3 different pieces of this that all have to perform from those 4 aspects. And you could have the perfect HVAC system, but if you put it in a house that performs horribly, the homeowner's still going to have comfort problems. Those 3 things, the equipment, the system, and the building, all have to work together. And so for high performance, it's a matter, a lot of times, we're trying to meet the industry where they are. And that's, let's get the equipment working right first. Once you've mastered that, let's get into the ducts. Once you've got the ducts mastered, now let's branch out and let's start focusing on what you're conditioning. So we look at it as kind of a 3-step process. It's also a troubleshooting process that we teach whenever people are starting looking at comfort problems, because there's so many of these things that are floating around. And if you start trying to focus on everything at once, you just freeze up. An analogy I like to use is from the old circuses. where you had the lion tamer. The lion would sit up on a stool, and of course, the lion tamer had a chair in its hand, and there were 4 different legs on that stool. Well, the lion would freeze anytime it had the chair was poking it in the face, not actually touching it, but the lion freezes. And a lot of times people think the lion's intimidated, and that's not the case. The lion could swat the chair and eat the guy if it wanted to. What's happening is the cat's froze because it's trying to analyze everything all at once. We know the term paralysis analysis. It can't focus. It's trying to focus on all these things all at once, so it does nothing. It just roars. And a lot of times that's what happens in our industry. We start focusing on all these things. We got to get the equipment right. We got to get evacuation right, combustion right, refrigerant side right, airflow right. We start focusing on all these things, building leakage, room pressures, and we talk about them and we don't do anything. So what we've got to do is figure where are we going to start? And that's where that path to performance starts. You start with where you're at. You start to master different principles and you slowly get better. I'll talk about it at the symposium. It's called the 1 degree principle. And you think about, actually, Brian wrote a really excellent article about it earlier this week about the chart showing what happens with latent heat. There's always a hidden potential there, but you have to raise the temperature before it's released. And depending on the amount of heat that you apply is going to depend on how much of that hidden energy is released. And with any of this stuff, what you're trying to do is just add 1 degree at a time. You're just trying to move one step forward and not backwards, but one step forward to improving how you do things. And I think that's where a lot of this ties in. So if you guys are thinking, well, there's all this stuff, where do I start? Start at the equipment. Start with what you're comfortable with. And then branch out into the ducks. Guys are like, where do I design first? Do I measure first? Experiment. We've got a coaching program we're going through now called Path to Performance Coaching. And what we do is we break all the different skill sets down into 10, and then we set monthly and then daily goals. It's weird because what we're trying to do with our industry is we're really trying to break years of bad habits. We've been promoting box efficiency since the late 70s. And it's almost arrogant that we think we're going to turn the industry around in a couple of years. This has been going on for over 50 years. This is going to take a long time to change. We may not see it in our lifetime. But I think with everything that's out there, we can start turning the ship now. And we can start saying, let's start taking these small steps and let's start changing habits. A comparison I heard years ago talked about habits being like strands of a cable that'll hold up a suspension bridge. If you've got all the strands wound tightly together, I mean, it can hold up the bridge, traffic that goes across it, but you start fraying off one cable at a time and you weaken the capacity of that bridge to hold anything. And habits are the same way. They bind us. I know I had a lot of bad habits and it took a lot of time to break those habits. So as we're trying to elevate the industry, what we're doing is we are really changing habits. We're changing behavior. So there's a lot more to it than just the technical side. It's the people side. So it's going to start one person at a time, one HVAC system at a time, one customer at a time, because that's ultimately who we're serving and who pays the bills.
For any of you out there that are changing, if you've ever done change before, that's probably a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm going to say from what David just said right there, be willing to be a little uncomfortable. And I think it'll take everybody some good places.
Yeah. Be willing to admit that you might not be right. It's hard to admit fault sometimes, but just ask questions. I gave Jim the example. He just asked why, and he was asking certain questions. Just ask questions. If you see something that doesn't make sense, ask. There's a community out there that is, for the most part, willing to lift up others from what I have seen. A lot of good people out there that before, when Eric and I were learning this stuff earlier, we were doing this in a vacuum. So you took what information that you could. Now it's out there from a bunch of different sources.
Yeah, it's out there from a lot of different sources now and much, much easier to access. Even when I was starting in, which is admittedly way after you started in the trade, a lot of it was a phone call. You had to make a phone call. You had to find some paper. The internet was kicking off and HVAC was really starting in a few places on the internet when I started in, but it wasn't nearly as widespread then as it is now.
Yeah, we go back to the alt HVAC and HVAC talk days. So
yeah, and HVAC ProTech and some of the others that have popped up and gone by the wayside over the years, the forums and whatnot. Now, of course, we have social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. I don't know, they're all over the place. I can't even keep track of everything these days. YouTube's a great medium.
It is, because everybody learns different.
Yeah, and there's still blogs, there's newsletters, there's articles out there. David, I've really enjoyed you coming on here today, and I'm going to ask you for some final thoughts. for our listeners out there, and anything you want to throw at them?
If I could go back and talk to myself when I first started doing this, one of the things that I would say is, if you're going to try this, be patient with yourself. You're not going to get it all at once. And you really have to have a growth mindset, not one that you're going to be perfect all at once, but that you're going to get better slowly over time. Be in it for the long game. And just look for how you can do something different every single day that will improve what you're doing, and just keep adding to it. It's a compounding effect. I have no doubt that our industry can get to high performance. Will everyone want to do it? No. It does take a commitment. It's not for everybody. But if there's anybody that's out there that's listening to this, and you're sick and tired of the status quo of our industry and how things are going, then high performance might be for you. If you're looking to differentiate yourself, you're looking to prove that your work is better and your work actually does what you say it's going to do, I know it changed how we went to market. We quit focusing on equipment and we started focusing on systems, and then we could prove them. We totally changed how we presented to our customers based off of what we've learned and continue to learn. And now it's easier. If some of the tools that we talked about existed, it would have been so much easier. So if you're going to start on your own stuff. The one place that we teach to measure, and you can find all kinds of information out there about this, start measuring static pressure on your own systems. Measure the blood pressure of your HVAC systems and see what they're doing. Then move on from there. Like I said, it's a path. You have to start at least one place. And by testing, you're going to start asking questions. And that's good. Because when you start asking questions, you start trying to see what's up. As we said, there's all kinds of people out there that have been down this road. They've got dirt under their fingernails. And if somebody can't give you the answers, keep asking. You'll eventually find somebody.
There's a lot of very, very helpful people out there that are definitely willing to help anybody that wants to learn move on to that next step and improve and grow. I love a lot of the communities out there now in the HVAC world. There are some unhelpful ones, but there are so many good helpful ones.
There's a lot more helpful ones, I believe.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good people looking to give back and share. Take advantage of it.
100%. Well, David, I appreciate you coming on today. Thank you very much. And all our listeners out there, we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Building HVAC Science Podcast. The Building HVAC Science Podcast is a production of TrueTech Tools. And full disclosure, I'm the owner of TrueTech, and Eric Kaiser is our employee, our industry engagement manager. And the opinions expressed are those of my guest, my co-host, or myself, depending on who's speaking, of course. And if you're in the market for any tools or test instruments mentioned in the podcast, you can always go to TrueTechTools.com, TrueTechTools.com, and you can use the offer code HVACBS for a nice discount. We include some links in the show notes, a link to David's LinkedIn profile, NCI's homepage, the NCI store, we're a partner with NCI, the NCI store on the TrueTech Tools website, and also the key product we talked about, the digital TrueFlow Grid, a link directly to that where you can purchase at TrueTech Tools. Again, thank you for listening to this episode of the Building HVAC Science Podcast. Until next time, take care.